So the book has taken a couple years to put together. I was working on it and at the same time of working on several other manuscripts, including a memoir, what I call a memoir-esque project, and a couple of other poetry books, all writing them at the same time, and then more stuff on top of that that I've been writing. And I have a complicated relationship with I have a complicated relationship with a couple of things. So over theorizing and all these new terms for things where I'm thinking, okay, like I think I remember saying in the email I sent to you that I was like, I've never studied anything about trauma writing or writing about one's trauma. I just know for me, writing was a lifeline. That's what I do. I made the joke at my book launch that at the end of a poem, I said, I'm sorry, I guess I was supposed to get a trigger warning, but I wasn't warned for my life as a woman of color, and everyone laughed. So it was this sort of like, I was like, I'm sorry about that. And, just to kind of loosen it, because I just don't know how to make sense of all this new language and feeling like we're over languaging ourselves and how that would get in the way of me and my work as an artist. Because I'm multidisciplinary. I work with photography, I work with all sorts of different mediums and write across different mediums. Specifically as it relates to ghetto claustrophobia, dreaming of mama while trying to speak woman in woke tongues. It just felt like a process of just keep writing and then see what emerges and see what the work tells me. And then the other complexities were about, oh, wow, I guess I'm using what they call, African-American vernacular English or Black English vernacular, which I have a problem with. One, I wasn't raised to speak that way. Two, if one speaks that way, people assume that that's your only mode, like driving stick, like you're stuck in first shift or second shift or somehow. Three, there's this assumption that it's called low language and that anything as proper as I'm speaking now would be called high language. I reject that. And actually, thanks to a workshop facilitator who's, I said out loud, I said, I don't really like using Black English vernacular. He said, why? It's so lyrical. It's so, older white man. He said, it's so lyrical. It's so, and I thought about it and I said, maybe because it's not like I don't, there's I think the name of the book was called Double Speak. And it was about how Black women speak so many different languages. We go into the boardroom, we speak one way. And our relationships to speak another, because of course, goodness forbid, we emasculate our men. To our mamas and our papas and cousins or whoever and girlfriends and boyfriends or like whoever our friends are in that close knit, we speak yet another language. And so our tongue is twisted forward, backwards, sideways, all kinds of ways. And when I saw it on a page, and even as I tried to think about the process of my memoir, which is written in 2 languages, and taking the risk to just, use these voices of and these persona of how they're talking and tapping into my Southern heritage and culture that I feel some way kind of cut off from, then it felt to me of just kind of feeling my way around. Reclamation feels too bold to say, but I guess I'll stop there to see what your other questions might be.
Wow.
I have plenty I could ask.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Thank you, Shanta. I just wanted to, it's not really questions, it's just a couple of things that I would like for us to kind of meditate on. That was brought on by what you shared, Shanta, what you just shared. One thing was the trigger warning aspect of it, and then like relating that to this word heavy that we've all kind of been, you know, that, and I loved what you said about, oh, well, I wasn't given a warning, right? And then there's like this laughter that comes, and it's like there's like this weird awkwardness. We know what we're all talking about. We know, and then just like as an artist, to be able to write about yourself in a very honest way, and then have to kind of deal with that the social dynamics of storytelling, which would say, oh, well, that was really traumatic that you just shared. And it's like, well, wait a minute, right? Like, yeah, so I definitely want to trigger as it relates to the word heavy. And then another thing was when it seems like when, and I'm generalizing on purpose, but like as a Black woman writer, seems like you're presenting identity every time you come to the page, and like most of that has nothing to do with why you came to the page to begin with. So what, in what ways, because like we think about, and I love what you said about you know, as Black women, you know, we have different, you know, languages, right? And it's really interesting because I think we can think of it as languages, but I think that society may look at it as identity, right? And like that being imposed on us. And like, this is also that I really want to make it clear that this is like not code switching. It's more nuanced than that, it's deeper than code switching. So those are the two things. They're big umbrella things, but those are the two things that are coming up for me.
It's funny because speaking of, there's a lot in that. When I hear the word heavy, I feel like I'm being told I'm heavy. I'm being told my life is too much. I'm being told someone can't take my life. When I hear that something's been traumatically written about, I'm thinking, well, I'm sharing either some stories or verse. What about that is traumatic? You can wake up in the morning, that's traumatic. You are born and you come into a planet that was started with a bang. That's pretty traumatic. You know, if you were one of the babies that cried when you got here, and depending on what your belief system is, that's traumatic. Coming into this new world when you've been enveloped in amniotic fluid, that's trauma. But yet, like the word, well, there's so many words in our society that we say, oh, well, that, not so much that, but that, you know, that's okay for that to be traumatic, but not that. And I think I also push back on that because I feel like my work was done when I've had white women, or in some cases, white men say to me, oh, I really connected with that line. Or to say to me, you know, I didn't go through the exact same things, but I know what you're talking about. That is exactly what I'm interested in. Because I'm interested, I like to say I'm boundaryless. You know, I think it's anti-human to fit us in such neat little boxes and packages. I do not fit. So speaking of identity, for example, growing up, I wasn't Black enough. In one of my relationships, my stepson gave me a test. Like, he was just like, do you like hot sauce? I said, no. Well, do you like this? No, not so much. It's like, oh, like that, the whole, like, what makes you Black enough? Oh, jokes about, you know, I paid certain friends to be my friend, you know, even though, you know, yeah, I grew up in Hartford. Yes, I love the Eagles. Yes, I love Led Zeppelin. Yes, I love Jay-Z. Yes, I love, the Gregorian chants. You know, I love that whole range of things, and I am beyond the containers that people want to hold me in. Those containers can be their prison. And so if my work is held in that way, they're cutting themselves off from an opportunity, and they're cutting me off from an opportunity to even engage. But how people are going to label things, that's not necessarily my problem either, because I think that, I like, as I think about the fact that, so for example, Fine Clothes to the Jew, Langston Hughes, comes out 1927. Black critics had a problem with it. Literary magazines didn't so much have a problem with it. The misunderstanding of the title. Zora Neale Hurston, Their Eyes Were Watching God, almost going out of print for 30 years until it was revived in 1978. Toni Morrison, all the critics saying, oh, wow, it'll be great when she stops, talking about this specific Black experience. And then, of course, her not getting due, it took June Jordan and a bunch of writers to sign a petition for her to get her notice. And now there's another kind of performance. And the performance looks like this. The performance looks like, so I was asked the other day about land acknowledgement. I have indigenous ancestry, all sorts of other ancestry. And I haven't wrapped my head around what it means for people to make an acknowledgement and then go on to do really screwy things that widen the gap between this is stolen land and you're talking to a lot of possibly stolen bodies and bones. And then you go on to continue whatever you were doing as, let's say, an individual or institution. And I wonder about that, the performance of our rightness, the performance of our social justice, the performance of being able to say, to be able to use the right vernacular. I don't always use the right vernacular. I'm okay with that. And I'm okay with saying, you know what, I'm not sure how I feel about land acknowledgement if it's a performance. I don't like the performance quality of things. The Black Lives Matter signs, they do not make me feel more welcome. What's inside on your bookshelf? What are you listening to? When is the last time you've truly engaged with a person of color around your table and there is some true intimacy in sharing there? But you have a sign on your lawn. That doesn't make me feel more welcome. In fact, it actually inspires me to want to ask some more questions like, oh, what are you reading? And I'm not talking about anything off the list that they just came out with, because now Black lives really do matter. I'm talking about how far you go back and engage with. And I'm not hard on people. I mean, I'm also the same person who says the best way I like to come together. We before COVID, we were doing something called Black Southern Thanksgiving. You didn't have to be Black to come. I didn't do no, this is anti-colonial things. I don't do that. It was just, I wanted to share my Auntie Mary's cornbread. I wanted people to taste the manna pudding. I wanted them to have some macaroni and cheese. And it all started because I couldn't bring, my mother-in-law was like, oh, we don't really do mac and cheese at the, our Thanksgiving. I said, okay, no problem. And we both laughed about it because I said, oh, I guess that's Black Thanksgiving. And we laughed about it. And then my husband said, we should do that. I was like, do what? And he was like, the collard greens and everything, we should do it. So we planned it and it got bigger and bigger. Like, 1 week, the first Saturday in December, don't serve a whole turkey just in case people have some trauma around turkey, but it's like, just, we have like the cornbread stuffing, the regular stuffing, the whole spread. And I had forgot that had went missing for me, but it gave me an opportunity to share. And some of everybody was up in the place. Some of everybody. They didn't have to be Black to participate, nor was there any agenda to talk about anything. It was just, please come eat. This is my Auntie Mary's recipe. And the coolest thing I just discovered, and I'll wrap with this, the coolest thing I just discovered was my Auntie Sheila said there were 2 cookbooks in the family, very old cookbooks. And the other one, we don't know what happened to, the one that belonged to Auntie Mary. But the one that belonged to my grandmother, my Auntie Sheila has. And she says it has, and it's giving me goosebumps to talk about it. It has the drippings of the food, of what she cooked. And it's going to make me tear up. But all I'll just wrap up and say is, you know, it's great that we're in this age of discovery and that people want to dissect things and talk about things and do things and explore things, but it means nothing without the action. And it means really doubly nothing without actually connecting to the real experiences and the people within them. And I feel like for me, that's why I'm so passionate about the humanities and poetry and the arts and literature and film, because I feel like they're true bridges. They enter you without having to say, hey, I'm taking a picture of me at a march. You know, good and darn well, you don't do that every day of the week. It's like showing up to church on Sunday, but you sinning on Friday, Saturday, Monday, you know, all around it, but you're not living it.
So Shanta, that just, I mean, I wish I could show you, the notes that I scribbled, while we were talking and just listening. And it was really beautiful. And Sahra, thank you so much for just framing it in that way that was so eloquent and so like, it was so warm in the way that you pulled that out, for Shanta. So that was just really beautiful. I will tell you just some of the things that I just was writing. The first thing, was when you said, oh, there should, trigger warnings or whatever. And we've had these conversations. Trigger warnings they are so complicated because there's so much privilege in who gets to have a trigger warning. So right before we started this conversation, offline, B-roll or whatever, I was having a conversation about my own, interests academically, which is all public scholarship. Sage on the stage is not what I'm looking to do. But, my framework basically is suggesting, and I don't mean this to be Black nihilism in any way, but that we are, as Black women, born with a form of disability simply because of the hatred and the vitriol that and the stress that attacks Black women in every pore from the moment they are born until the moment they die. And so that was the very first thing I thought about. I was like, yes, girl, like that's exactly, and being able to be in this specific space, and I'm seeing you all nod, I will say is very different than being in my classroom space and trying to just, describe like, this is this is important. This is why I'm doing this thing. And people being like, Black women are what? Like, okay, no, like people just not getting it. And so I really love that. I also wrote down one of my favorite cookbooks called The Welcome Table. And it's one of my favorites mostly because it was a textbook I had in undergrad. And that was just, really special. But I really, one thing that I just circled a bunch of times is that vernacular or languages or whatever people choose to, to say, and how that interfaces with us and our identities. Like, it's just like in my mind, like ticker tape, I saw Aunt Sarah, Sophronia, Sweet Thing, and Peaches. And I was like, okay, it's like every time we open our mouths, we're either mammy, tragic mulatto, hypersexualized, or angry. And so for everything there, I just wanted to validate that. And that's what something I was thinking earlier, just that, so much of your work really is in this very specific vein of Black women truth tellers. And, now we look at those women and are like, oh my gosh, I read Beloved in, my second year in undergrad, and it just changed my life. But like when that book came out, people were not like, let me just read this to my, whatever. Like, no, not at all. Right. And so, I look at those books and I look at what it took. And, you made the point about, their eyes were watching God going out of print and just passing around like a Xerox copy, and like having that kind of like passion about bringing the work of this writer, and more importantly, this anthropologist. And, as an artist and a poet, in your multi-hyphenate world, that is also a hyphen I would give you, that you are doing a really specific kind of cultural anthropology here and pulling it out. I mean, with your Indigenous heritage, you've mentioned to me, that you have, Southern American heritage. That's, where I come from. So I really do feel kinship always with, because it's its own thing, for better or worse, it's its own thing. And, I really resonated with that. And so like just thinking about the breadth of your work, I appreciate and admire the way you've been able to navigate that arc for your own healing and your own expression, while still being buffeted with these questions from the outside that are not always truly questions of you, or questions that need to be asked. So I think that, one of the things that I'm really interested in is like this kind of concept of like language, vernacular. What does it mean to speak a certain way? And one of the things that you said, I would really, if you feel comfortable, love to hear you say a little bit more on is where in Black communities is vernacular allowed? That whole whatever, it's so bifurcated to folks who are very under-resourced. I mean, I grew up very poor, and I know somebody made me, I'm not even gonna call my relative's name, but the person that taught me how to walk with a book on my head, that was real, right? And then there's, places where that is the only known tongue, and it is the mother tongue of a community, is its own particular vernacular. And so, I thought what you said was really powerful. And if you feel comfortable, I would just love to hear you say some more about that, kind of, especially in connection to maybe particularly your forthcoming, memoir and your next book of poetry.
Sure. It's always a tangle because, again, growing up, I think in my immediate family with my mother and father, I'm the only one with 3 degrees. And so it was always, and my mother, she's mentally ill. It's not something that we really discuss. It's an open secret in my family. But she knew enough to teach me a couple of things. Hay was for horses. You don't, I remember back in the day, there was a mode for saying, what happened? What happened? You don't say what happened. It's just like, what does that even mean, right? She knew enough to know that I needed to be able to stay alive in society without, she was very sharp about it. It was very extreme, and my father wasn't a picture, but she was truly the matriarch of the family and ran things, and my father's at work. I think manners that just had to be flawless, even if she is a really raw, rude person, has been. But the way I was expected to represent the family, will not embarrass the family and go out. And so I think language, for me, it's spoken as well as living. It's performance. You go into a store, to this day, I go into a store and surrender my bags. Most of the time, I surrender my bags. I was taught, little girl, don't ever put your hands in your pocket. Safety, illustration of how safe you are to others in society. I resent that, but long lectures, even screaming at me for making sure that I wasn't fumbling in front of a police officer when pulling out anything out of the glove box. Now I carry my insurance card to my car, like the extra one, in my wallet, just in case they think I'm reaching for something. Vernacular is a very interesting thing because it You can destroy and create realities with it. It's a way of saying that you do and you don't belong. I never truly felt like I belonged growing up in Hartford. Either I was being accused of, talking white, wasn't Black enough, or, there are all sorts of ways that vernacular is in the body as well. And this is maybe me as, someone who has belly dance. So I think about choreography and I think about what lives in the body as well as, other forms of when we talk about language, but also the way you get punished if you're going back to the community and how they see you and perceive you. And whether, I've had people when I was working in New Haven, I've done all sorts of things. I, was contracted with their New Haven Health Department. And, before that, I had started Planned Parenthood of Southern New England statewide internship program. I think it's still going. The way that people would tell me they didn't answer my calls because they thought I was a Yaley. They thought I was calling from Yale University because the way I speak. So the way that I've often felt at an early age, a sense of punishment, I can't play double dutch because apparently my turning isn't right. So it was like, she turns double. So it was just like, but yet I miss double dutch. And so given that, I think it's, for me, my reaction to all that has been be bold in creating my own language and taking back what I want to take back and figuring out and sorting and figuring out how I want to do it. It's also inspired a certain boldness that started somewhere between 2017 and 2018 when I read Ovid's Metamorphosis. Read it cover to cover, finally. Like, I knew about all sorts of whack stuff. People turn into trees, people being chased, people turn into birds. And I read it and I said, oh, that's cool. I want to see a Black version. I wrote it. And I went and I kept diving back in and thinking about what Black metamorphosis looked like. And being in conversation 2,000 year plus with Ovid, trying to get inside his head, trying to figure out what it felt like to be an exile, outsider, things like that. That is the second manuscript, which looks like it is being picked up. It looks like I have a publishing home for it. So there's that. And then there's also like the memoir where I was thinking, okay, there's several narratives that Black women could tell, right? Either we're so angry, we got screwed up. This is what the world and whoever and wherefore done did to us. And we have that right. I'm going to fiercely protect that. Anybody has that right to tell their story in any way they want. But there was a certain way I wanted to talk about, certain incidences in my life that are a lot, but I decided, I've always been a fan of Marquez. 100 Years of Solitude was very instructional for me. And even though we have a problematic, there's a problem with the term magical realism, I've taught it, but I also know and understand that there are cultures who've been doing this and also African cultures. This is not new, but for whatever it is, it has a label. And I decided I was going to bring Marquez into the streets of Hartford, Connecticut. And I was going to take my tale, and the name of the working title of it is How to Train a Trickster and Other Tales from Girlhood. And that, for me, it was just about memory and stories and episodes that aren't quite linear, and these characters, and it being a level of, yes, it's creative nonfiction, but it's also very much, it's also very much thinking about the mythic proportions of one's life. And you know, there's that question of who gets to tell and how do they get to tell. But no one's going to tell me what I can and can't tell and how I tell it. I have that. And even if people are trying to enforce that they wanted to, what they expect from me, like what we talked about, Lucy Terry Prince. I do not write like Lucy Terry Prince. I am not Lucy Terry Prince. But I do pay homage to the princes and I talk about their lives. But my bearing witness is a little bit different, and then and how I do it and what people might expect, even of my photographs.
Thank you so much. I'm just gonna two things, because I mean I have
a couple of things too, of course.
I'm gonna make it real short because I want to give Sahra the mic and not take up too much space. I really appreciated so much of that, and as you were talking, one of the things I was trying to come up with or even conceptualize is how can we verbally or in our language or pull from ancient languages, ancient tongues that do belong to us. What is that word that describes embodying what we hear in the United States and North America refer to as vernaculars? Because in the same way, that I heard you, Shanta, talking about languages, and I've heard that as well, but it's not quite that, because it's not quite entree. It isn't, what language is supposed to do. That's not, that's not what language does for us, and so to hear you talk about vernaculars, like that was very powerful, and like the embodiment of many, vernaculars. And then my only other question, then, I'm going to hand it to Sahra, is are you familiar with the work of the Theater of War? They're based in Brooklyn.
No.
I want to send you something, because there's this little organization, little theater, that's called the Theater of War. And what they do is recreate, classic novels, classic texts in quasi modern day, kind of settings. And so I was at Dartmouth at the time that they came and they did Antigone and Ferguson. And it was an experience that I cannot ever recreate for you. And so afterwards there was a panel, an educator, a police officer, a student, and I can't remember and someone who was actually from Ferguson. I was the educator that was on that panel. And my panel was all Black. And how that happened, it's just, it was a wonderful moment. But there had been another show the night before, and theirs was very different. And I was told very, very, very directly, the one that you were in was we're going to use the word, right? It was heavier. It was heavier than the other one. And people really had very mixed responses. But, they do that. They have a really interesting version of A Hard Day's Journey Into Night that they did based around New Hampshire. And I know I've got this gentleman's card, so expect a text, or something. But he was just really, small theater, but huge production. And so when you mentioned that about Ovid and the metamorphosis and seeing what does that look like, it made me want to go pull N.K. Jemisin off the shelf and just give the book a hug, we gonna be all right. And it also made me want to share that with you. So thank you. And I know Sahra has some things that she'd like to ask you as well.
Oh my, I'm really enjoying this. Wow. I wanted to just acknowledge, I'm getting this sense of comfort that I don't often get. And I've been meditating on, in light of this conversation, impending conversation that we're having now, how do we get Black, specifically Black women artists, to just talk about their work, and it's what is this that I'm feeling right now is the comfort of just, we'll just engage with the person and with the work. And then from there, see how it goes. And it feels like a formula, but it's really not. It's just the fact that we all happen to be Black women, very different Black women from different parts of what you name it, but like we're sharing this space, and like coming to it, like showing up in this space is kind of, you know, it doesn't have what it usually has, which is what it comes with, the perceptions that we don't even, you know about. So I just wanted to say that and acknowledge that I'm very thankful. And for Shanta, I had the privilege of hearing you perform your poetry, and it was amazing in the backdrop of our beautiful state parks. And even with the rain, it was absolutely amazing. And when we're talking about language and vernacular and, you know, just even everything that you said about, I love what Rachel said about calling you a cultural anthropologist. I think in engaging with you and your work, I could see that. And also the different, as you speak to the different experiences you've had in different spaces throughout your life, this idea of punishment for just being, right? For just showing up as you are, and how that's a pretty big theme, even though it's not a theme that you chose, which I think is really, really interesting. And then I also think about what you told me and others about how you love to sneak into abandoned buildings. And that's a big hobby of yours, to my understanding, as you got older. And I remember one time you said something about, I don't know, maybe I'm projecting. I don't even know, honestly. But I remember it was something to the effect of, you know, someone who looks like you in the US can't just be going into an abandoned building, right? Like
about that.
yeah.
I'll let you finish your question because we
did. Yeah. And what, but like the way that you talk about it is very mystical. It's freeing. It's like curious. It's childlike. It's playful. It's, you know, but it's so interesting when you juxtapose that with just you being able to share your work with the world. And it seems like you've somehow developed in your artistry and your craft and your scholarships just ways to be able to sneak into things, you know, that from a different perspective. At least I don't know if I'm reading that in, but it's very interesting that, you know, again, it goes back to who gets to tell those stories, right? Who gets to sneak into the building, you know, a small Black child, girl or boy, breaking into an abandoned house. Implications are way different than otherwise, right? So, but then you're not a child, you're a grown woman, you're thriving, you're, you know, you're out here, you know? So it's like, you don't need to be sneaking into anything, but there's a performance to your craft. And when you were specifically, the language question, I think, is around, I think you may have said that you speak to your ancestors in your work, and that there's like this dialogue. So sometimes when you go in and out of different languages or different accents or dialects, you're like, it's almost this internal thing that you're doing. But when you read it, it really shows. When you perform it, it really shows. So like, I'm interested in people who are engaging with your work through text. They wouldn't be able to see that. Like when you're saying, oh, that boy be, like, that's something that you have to hear. So I don't know. I don't know what the heck I'm saying at this point, but yeah, there's that. I'm just super inspired. Sorry, I'll stop now.
No, I love what you said about, because as much as I see myself as a cultural anthropologist in my work, I also see myself as a archaeologist, someone who likes to dig and surface. I love surfacing what's beneath the surface. I am a reader. I can read things. Part of that comes from, for survival. Growing up, you better be able to, you know, my home was not so safe at all. So I needed to be able to read these situations. The abandoned places, it's not, It's not a hobby for me. It's a way of life. I'm always going to want to figure out how I need to get into the spaces, either where I'm told I'm not supposed to be, or I'm going there anyway. I'm just going there. I don't know anything about, that there's been talk, especially in this environment, about, bodies of color being around certain tables. For me, I belong at all tables. Any damn table I wish, please. And yeah, sure, the table might happen to be largely white. I'm not unfamiliar with that before Vermont. You go in, you walk into a project and you're overseeing something and you're engaging with PhDers. This is in my 20s, who are white. And I was not intimidated by that. And I didn't feel like I didn't belong, even though there is this other dialogue that's going on, the imposter syndrome that I think a lot of people suffer, where you're thinking, oh, this little black girl from Harvard, who does she think she is? In addition to the other layer of my mother saying that to me, who did I think I was? I'll save the story. People have heard it. It's horrifying, but it's like, so when that was happening, and the way she would ask the question, what she was doing when she asked the question to me, I made a deal with myself that no one ever again was going to tell me who do I think I am, because I'll show you. And I'm inspired by that. And so being drawn to abandoned places well after teenage years was just also about seeing places, or, these asylums that no one wants to talk about or see or remember. The electric shock therapy machine that I came in contact with is rusting and sitting there, or, the way that one abandoned place I went to was like, I was really about to hit mother load. I was so excited. And walking along, and after taking a close look at some of the architecture, and I look at this really raggedy building, frosted glass and panels. It's like, oh my God, that's mother load. Can't even see inside. It's so good. And an undercover cop pulls up, and he's just saying, he looks bored. He's just sitting there like this. And I had a Smurf blue scarf on, and I'm with my friend who's tall, Nordic looking. So we're just there. This was a few years ago. I think it was in 2016. And he was like, what are your names? Where are you from? He just looked bored, right? And then so I just struck up a conversation with him. I said, so what are they building here? And he was just like, oh yeah, they're building a hotel and a Costco. And it really made me think about erased places, erasure. And the way that, even with a friend, maybe a year and a half ago, tried to put something in a GPS to go look for it. We kept coming back to these condominiums. And I was thinking, oh, Tulsa, same thing, erasure. Red Summer of 1919, erasure. A lot of people don't, our willed forgetting and encouraged amnesia in American culture and the erasure, but then layered on top of what we do with land, whether, we're talking about the theft of land, or whether we're talking about how things get covered up, and so I think that's what I love about the abandoned buildings or places where there's this history where you're like, wow, this was once X, Y, and Z, whatever it was. And now it's there. Sometimes they're kind of hidden. They're not all of them are on a map. You have to read. I got really good at reading how people talked about where it's located, because they wouldn't, I guess there's a rule in the community of people who do that, and I'm on several groups, that you don't give specific addresses and things like that. And so I'm like, oh, great. So you learn to talk about reading text, learn to read the white spaces, or some of the things that are being said about what's in the vicinity. And, there's that kind of level of breaking in. And then there's a level of breaking into oneself, where you're going in search of and saying, what's the cellar hole, or playing beneath the cellar hole. What's in that foundation? What's beneath the shell of feeling forced to be? Had a situation where someone said I looked angry, or this is several years ago, and they said, you looked angry, everybody could feel the coldness. And I saw myself responding to this person. Was a white woman. I felt myself responding and saying, oh yeah, I was just coming out of surgery. It was like a month later where I'd finally like been around. And then finally I said, oh, screw that. And I resent the email and I said, you know, you may not know it, but that's racial bias to tell a Black woman that she's not smiling or seem happy or, you know. And what I always love about these conversations, and I've had several of them, people are quick to tell me how they grew up poor. They are quick to meet the criticism around race or being told or presented with something with, well, I grew up with no money. Now, why would you assume I can relate to that? And why would you assume that I would want to relate to that?
Because then you're both marginalized.
Right. And I'm no one's margin. I'm in no one's margin. I do not see myself as a marginalized voice. I do not see myself as a minority. Someone like actually asked me a question like, how did it feel, blah, 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 minority. And I'm like, who? Because you're not talking to me. You know, I look at, like, if you were to collect all the brown people all around the planet, we're a majority. I'm sorry. I don't speak that language of, and even though we've talked that language in public health and education, and it is real, I'm not saying it isn't. You know, there is architecture to saying, for example, to women, well, you know, yeah, you earn less than men on the dollar and this. And so therefore for people to feel a certain way about their power. And for me, it's been about staying in my power and within very real systemic oppressive environments and such, but being bold about it and saying, well, no, that language doesn't relate to me. Even the use of the term BIPOC. I have a very hard time using that. I don't know what that means. I'm not a BIPOC. So, you know, like taking back something where people are going to try to say, well, this is what you are. It's like, no, I'm not. Sorry. You can't say, especially Black voices being marginalized, when that is the foundation of all civilization. Our economic systems, the free labor, the forced labor, we are the foundation. We are the all. So, but it's a great mental exercise to keep reminding people where they belong.
Yeah. Yeah. I when you said that, it made me think of, because I actually have strong feelings about that as well, about the whole minority thing. But just that to me, that just sounds like a language of erasure, you know, that like that by adhering to someone else's way of like, they have to come down to your level to let you know. And if you put yourself there by agreeing to the language, which is really all that we have in that moment, then automatically the power dynamics are right. And then for women, it's even doubly, right? Well, you make less than man anyway. So like, well, are we still talking about this? You know? Right. But it's powerful. It's powerful. And it's, yeah. And, you know, it's interesting. It's interesting because like, you know, I know we have to go and I'm so glad you wrapped it up in this way, actually, because you brought up erasure, which is something that we can all get guilty of, like as far as like institutionally and, you know, systemically. And it's something that we all ponder, right? And doubly for us. But to just really to have more conversations like this, I think will not only amplify, but also really speak to the need of, well, can we have a conversation without it being, oh, three marginalized women come together to, you know, like, and like maybe and you know, this is all coming to me now, but maybe in the future, this is what our dialogue will have to kind of model, because we can't keep using these words that are really not accurate. Like if we think of colonialism, we don't use that word enough in this country, because there's a lot of, I mean, I'm originally from Somalia, so like I can speak to that. But you know, colonialism is not a thing that is just, you know, that America's exempt from, right? That the West is exempt from. And just what it means to be able to colonize spaces and institutions and, you know, feelings and confidence and, you know, all of these things. They're like, and what it means to, when you keep using language of erasure and deficit, all you're doing is perpetuating scarcity mentality. That's all you're doing. And like when you do that, that's it. Like no one's free. Like, you know, like Baldwin says, like, I'm not free until you're free. Then no one's free. If that's the case, then you have people showing up to the same conversations with like wounds that are, you know, that we all are dealing with, that we're not addressing because we keep using this deficit language.
I also have thought that this conversation was just really comfortable. I think that comfortable is the word that is coming to me, not it felt good, not it felt like refreshing. I don't need refreshing. Like I need ease. And this conversation brought ease to my spirit, which has really been buffeted lately, as I know everybody for a million reasons. Every single human that I know and every single Black woman or femme that I know is going through some real soul pain, right? But I really appreciated this in context, and I just want to explain what I mean when I say that. Like when I say in context, like so much bigger than this one program where we go out into our state parks, which are beautiful, and engage with them, and no matter what our most visible identities are, we go and we sit in nature, we reclaim nature, and that's a beautiful thing. But like what I also think is beautiful, this isn't ideal. I would love to be sitting, in the same room with you all. There's still some body language things that are missing, but this is also really lovely. And the thing about being able to have this in a virtual space and to know that it will be preserved in a virtual space is that this table, this conversation, this back porch, front porch, rocking chair that we are creating right now can invite so many other people. There's so many more rocking chairs that we can say, sis, come sit with us. Sis, come learn with us, come cry with us, come rejoice with us, come just be with us, just come be Black with us, and let that Blackness happen however it wants. And I was so, this is just kind of the luck of the draw, or the work of the universe, that we are all from 3 very different backgrounds, but there were so many and continue to be so many ties that bind, that we all have experiences that are just, they are inalienably ours. And so for you to drill down into that in a way that, as Sahra said, it has often been seen like in a reductive way, a regressive model, but we can dig down and, like you said, be an archaeologist to the beauty that's underneath the piles and piles and piles and piles and piles of detritus of this country since 1619, and even before, because whoever had this idea was pondering this for a hot minute, right? So, like from here, from before to the future, where they say we're from, we're not. We're just real, and we're not from the future. We are here. We are eternal. We're from the past. We're from the future. We are always, right? And so I really just wanted to say thank you for voicing that and for centering yourself in that. Because I think a lot of times we talk about, again, back to the Black woman as monolith. It's like, oh, well, we're on the rise. We're doing the this, we're doing the that. But it's very seldom that we get to hear one Black woman say, no, I am not marginalized. No, I will not use this language. No, I reject what you just said. No, I refuse to be intimidated by your ivory towers because they just whitewashed anyway, and I probably did it. You know, like all of that is something that you are embodying as an individual. And to me, and this is just, you know, my last thing, because I want to, of course, give you the last word. I guess, you know, my last thing today with this conversation is thank you. It's been so beautiful. And I could just talk to you to, you know, Wonder Women all afternoon. But I really just wanted to say thank you for modeling for us a kind of expansiveness that I don't think many of us are taught. And, you know, I kind of mentioned Their Eyes for Watching God last week. I read it every year. Read it again last week. And for the first time, you really caught that Janie hated her grandmother for making her life small, even though that smallness was supposed to keep her safe. So I'm thinking about the women, our ancestors, who were we the daughters of, and what did they do that felt so incredibly traumatic to us? And not just felt, what was incredibly traumatic, but they were doing, honestly, as we define ethics, they were doing the very best that they could with the information and tools that they had. Is that enough? How do we reconcile how those things, you know, play out in our bodies, in our work, in our lives? And so just for doing that and just for being honest about that, Shanta, I just want to say deeply, deeply, deeply thank you.
You're welcome. And my thanks to both of you. If I may say, I know, and we didn't dig into this, but I know, like, behind the scenes, we had to work towards, you know, figuring out how we were going to talk about this. And I think that, you know, I mean, it is the whole challenge, you know, I don't want to represent a whole group. That's too much I'm not bearing that cross. I'm not doing that. I don't want to speak for my whole family. They're each individual members. I can speak and share my experience. Mm-hmm. And beyond that, I go beyond those things and my other writing too. But I think it's so important for, especially in Vermont, as individuals are thinking, you know, running around with the buzzwords, they're talking about DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility, and this, and open up the table and invite people in. But if you're extending the invitation, also make sure you have an appetite for what you're asking for. Make sure you do. Make sure that if you're saying we're doing this thing and we're engaging X, Y, and Z, also create space for it to get uncomfortable, as some of our conversations may have felt behind, you know, in trying to prepare for this. Because some of the stories that people may be sharing may not be the stories that we envision or we're expecting, especially, you know, individuals who walk in different sexualities. Their stories may not sound as hetero and packaged up as we want it to be. And what does that mean? And what does it really mean when we say, and this is so on PC, it makes me think of that Ice Cube song. You know, you could, you know, I think it's not called You Can Do It, Put Your Back Into It. That just happens to be the chorus. But it makes me think about, you know, diversity.
I almost went there.
You're right.
I only know the beat.
Yeah. Right. Don't make me start mimicking the beat because I can do it. It makes me think about, you know, people want these things. They want to be able to say, look, we're diverse. We're not doing some of the hard work. And why does it have to be so hard? Or why do we always have to make it a thing rather than meeting people from human to human, and not erasing all those identities, but just like, you know, I'm sharing a story, and one of the things that's been the most touching for me is people coming back and telling me, who do not look like me, to tell me that they related to it. And I'm like, oh man, I've done my job. Someone picked something out and it's made them think about their memory or their family secrets, or, you know, some of the themes of what does it mean to search through one's history. What does it mean for one to explore lineage? What does lineage look like? What does it feel like? What does it sound like? As we're, what do we remember of the stories that were being told? Especially with this language of receipts. Well, guess what? You're not always going to have receipts. So then the question is, what does it feel like? What do you remember? Yeah, this is a really great conversation. Thank you for this opportunity.